Did you really think no one was watching, Captain? The words sliced through the quiet morning like a blade, long before anyone realized how the day would unravel. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Hero Tales by Jacob so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. The sun had only just begun its slow climb over Fort Ridgeway, casting long amber streaks across the training grounds. Captain Emily Hart, at 28, adjusted the collar of her uniform and inhaled deeply, as if steadying herself for something she couldn't yet name. She had earned her position through discipline carved into her bones. Each promotion an echo of nights spent pushing herself harder than anyone expected. Today was supposed to be routine, a standard inspection, nothing more. But Emily felt an unease simmering beneath the surface. Maybe it was the absence of her commanding officer, who had been sent home on emergency leave, leaving her as the senior officer overseeing the entire inspection of Charlie Company. Or maybe it was the knowledge that Colonel Douglas Avery, a man whose reputation preceded him like a rolling storm, was the one conducting it. Avery, 52, had been in the Army nearly 3 decades. His uniform always immaculate, his chest full of medals earned through a combination of political maneuvering, intimidation, and, occasionally, merit. Stories followed him everywhere. Whispered accounts of his volatile temper, his unpredictable discipline, and, spoken only behind closed doors, his inappropriate remarks toward female soldiers. So far, none of it had stuck to him. Rank insulated him like armor. Emily had always managed to avoid being alone with Avery. She kept interactions professional, brief, and in plain sight. But today, circumstances were different. With her commanding officer gone, she had no buffer, no one to redirect Avery's attention if he chose to step beyond the lines of propriety. Charlie Company stood in a disciplined formation, 282 soldiers, boots gleaming, uniforms pressed to perfection. Emily walked past them with calm authority, noting the mixture of nerves and admiration in their expressions. Many of the younger women, new recruits from Kansas, Ohio, Arizona, looked at her as proof that they, too, could rise through the ranks without sacrificing who they were. A black staff car pulled up 15 minutes late. Avery climbed out with a slow, deliberate grace, as though the entire world existed for him to walk through it. His eyes, sharp but empty of warmth, swept across the waiting soldiers. Conversations died. Posture stiffened. Even the air seemed to retreat from him. The inspection began normally. Avery walked through rows of soldiers, firing pointed questions, lifting gear, testing the tiniest details. His aide, Lieutenant Morrison, scribbled notes and tried desperately to maintain the image of professionalism. But when they reached the portion of the formation where the female soldiers stood, everything shifted. Avery's tone softened, not kindly, but disturbingly. His questions became comments, then remarks, then something worse. Emily saw shoulders tighten, chins lift in forced composure. Private Hannah Pierce, a 19-year-old from Florida, was singled out. Avery criticized her posture, then her uniform, then, absurdly, her physique. The girl's jaw trembled, but she held her stance. Emily's chest tightened. Anger pressed against her ribs, but she forced it down. Reacting now would only make her soldiers more vulnerable. She needed to wait. Observe. Protect them without escalating the situation. Then Avery announced he wanted to inspect the weapons storage area. Protocol required Emily to accompany him. Morrison stepped away momentarily to handle paperwork, leaving Emily and Avery walking between rows of equipment racks, isolated from the company, though still within distant sight. At first, Avery's voice was casual. Too casual. "Captain Hart, you maintain yourself." "Well," he said, eyes drifting in a way that immediately soured the air. Impressive fitness for someone under so much pressure. Emily fought the instinct to recoil. "Sir, the inspection reports for Charlie Company." He cut her off with a smirk. "No need to hide behind formalities. You and I understand how the system works." She redirected again, keeping her voice steady. "Sir, the soldiers have performed exceptionally today. Equipment readiness is—" He stepped closer. Suddenly the tone shifted, dark, dangerous, unmistakably clear. "You want to advance, don't you, Captain?" he whispered. "Women who rise quickly in this organization generally understand what it takes. I can open doors for you. Or close them. Her pulse hammered in her ears. There it was, the behavior she had heard about, but never personally witnessed. She felt a heat rising through her chest, equal parts anger and disbelief. "Sir," she said firmly, "I am here to conduct an inspection. Please maintain professionalism." His expression soured instantly. "What did you just say to me?" His voice rose, not loud enough for others to hear, but sharp enough to slice through her composure. "Do you think anyone would believe you if you accused me of something? Do you know how many officers owe me favors?" Emily stepped back, keeping her hands visible, her stance controlled. "I'm ending this inspection, sir. We can return to the formation." But Avery's rage flared, years of entitlement exposed in a single violent gesture. His hand lifted, fast and furious, as though he intended to strike her across the face. Time slowed. Emily's training ignited automatically. 12 years of martial arts, countless hours with combat instructors, muscle memory overriding shock. She pivoted, caught his wrist, redirected his momentum. A single fluid movement, an armbar takedown. Then the crack, a sound that echoed sharper than gunfire in the silent weapons bay. Avery collapsed, screaming, clutching an arm now broken at a grotesque angle. Emily froze, breathing hard, her hands hovering in defensive readiness. But he was no longer a threat, only a man stunned by the consequences of his own violence. The commotion drew every eye on the parade field. Within seconds, 282 soldiers witnessed their feared colonel lying on the ground, moaning in pain, while Captain Emily Hart stood above him, steady, composed, unshaken. Silence blanketed the entire field. Not a whisper, not a breath, just disbelief, and something else blooming slowly in their eyes. Respect, relief, and the first fragile flicker of hope. For a long moment, no one moved. The shape of the scene burned itself into the minds of every soldier present. Colonel Avery writhing on the ground, his face drained of color, his broken arm bent at an unnatural angle, and Captain Emily Hart standing tall above him, her breath controlled, her expression carved from steel. Lieutenant Morrison arrived first, sprinting across the field with a stack of paperwork still clutched in his hands. The moment he saw Avery's arm, he nearly stumbled to a halt. "Captain, what happened?" Emily didn't speak right away. Her mind was still catching up with the rapid cascade of events, but her posture remained firm. She knew that whatever she said now would echo later in reports, hearings, investigations. "He attempted to strike me," she said simply, clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly still air. "I defended myself." A shiver rippled through the formation. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. The truth was visible to all of them, unmistakable, undeniable. Avery, clutching his arm, began shouting through clenched teeth. "She assaulted me. You saw it. Everyone here saw her attack her superior. I'll destroy your career. Hart, do you hear me? You're finished." But his voice cracked, revealing both agony and desperation. Every soldier present had seen the moment his hand rose first. They had seen the intent. They had seen who the aggressor really was. Medics rushed across the field with a stretcher. Emily stepped back as they worked, her gaze steady, hands clasped behind her back. Her heart drummed violently in her chest, but her face betrayed none of it. She was a captain, their captain, and she refused to show a flicker of fear. As Avery was lifted onto the stretcher, still shouting incoherent threats, Morrison swallowed hard and turned to Emily. "Ma'am, you know this is going to turn into something big." "I know," she replied softly. He hesitated, then stepped closer so only she could hear. "For what it's worth, every soldier here saw exactly what happened." She nodded slowly. One crisis had passed, but a bigger storm was already taking shape. By mid-afternoon, word had spread across the base like wildfire. Emily returned to her office, the door shutting behind her with a quiet click that echoed far louder in her mind. She sat down at her desk, hands folded, letting silence settle around her. Her body still carried the adrenaline of the encounter, but her training forced her to breathe with slow precision. She needed clarity, discipline, control. When she finally opened her laptop, she began writing her official incident report. Every word had to be precise. No embellishment, no emotion, no gaps. At approximately 0934 hours, during a routine inspection, Colonel Avery engaged in behavior inconsistent with professional military conduct. Her fingers moved steadily. She described the remarks, the isolation in the weapons bay, the escalation, the raised hand, the necessity of defensive action. Facts. Only facts. Not the fear that had crept into her chest. Not the humiliation she refused to allow him to inflict. Not the outrage burning beneath her calm exterior. When she finished, she exhaled slowly. A knock sounded at her door. "Come in." Sergeant Michael Diaz, one of her most trusted NCOs, stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His expression was serious, but beneath it, something fiercer shimmered. Loyalty. Respect. "Ma'am," he began, "I don't mean to overstep, but the soldiers, they want you to know we're with you. All of us. Every single one who witnessed it." Emily's throat tightened for a moment. "Thank you, Sergeant. That means more than you know." He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely?" "Granted. The colonel's been like this for years. We all knew it. Everyone on base did. But no one ever had the rank, or the courage, to stand up to him. Until today." Emily held his gaze. "This isn't over, Sergeant. You know that?" "Yes, ma'am," Diaz replied. "But neither are we." He left quietly, leaving a weight in the room far heavier than before, but not an oppressive one. A strengthening one. The first official inquiry began before sundown. Military police escorted Emily to a sterile conference room near headquarters, a room she had entered many times before for routine briefings. But tonight, the atmosphere felt different, charged, almost electric. Major General Patricia Hale, the highest-ranking female officer on the base, sat at the head of the table. Emily had always admired her, calm, deliberate, fair. But today, Hale's expression held something else too, concern. "Captain Hart," she began, gesturing for Emily to take a seat. "This is an informal preliminary inquiry. Your official interview will occur in the next 48 hours. Do you need counsel present?" "No, ma'am. I'm prepared to answer." Hale studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. Let's start at the beginning." Emily recounted every detail, the inspection, the comments, the isolation in the weapons bay, the threat, the raised hand, her defensive response. Her voice remained steady, unwavering, though her fingers curled slightly in her lap. When she finished, Hale leaned back. "What you've described aligns with multiple witness accounts gathered so far," the general said, her tone shifting subtly. "And with Lieutenant Morrison's statement. And with the medic's initial assessment of the colonel's injury." Emily's breath eased. But Hale wasn't finished. "However," she continued quietly, "Colonel Avery has already contacted his legal representation. He is claiming you attacked him unprovoked. He is pushing for court-martial proceedings." Emily nodded, unsurprised. She had expected nothing less from him. Hale's eyes softened. "This will not be easy, Captain. His connections run deep. But the truth is on your side, and so are your soldiers. I need you to stay steady. Do not engage with rumors. Do not speak to the media, and do not allow fear to dictate your next steps." "I won't, ma'am." Hale stood. "Good. Then remember this. The Army needs leaders who don't back down when the cost is high." Emily rose as well. "And you proved today," Hale said quietly, "that you are one of them." When Emily returned to her quarters later that night, exhaustion wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. But underlying it was something steadier, something unfamiliar but welcome. Determination. She sat on the edge of her bunk, closed her eyes, and let the weight of the day settle. She had defended herself. She had defended her soldiers. And now, she would defend the truth, no matter who tried to silence it. Outside, the base settled into its nighttime rhythm. Inside, Emily Hart inhaled deeply, preparing for the battle ahead. This time, it wouldn't be physical. It would be political, institutional, relentless. But she was ready. Sleep did not come easily that night. Captain Emily Hart lay awake in the dim quiet of her quarters, the faint hum of the air conditioning blending with distant footsteps in the corridor. Every time she closed her eyes, fragments of the day replayed themselves. The sudden motion of Avery's arm, the instinctive pivot of her body, the crack that still echoed somewhere deep in her memory. She sat up, letting her feet touch the cold floor. Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline her body had not yet fully purged. She whispered into the still air, as though admitting something to herself. "He was going to hit me." Saying it aloud did not make it easier. It simply made it real. At 0500, Emily rose, washed her face, and pulled her uniform on with practiced precision. Whatever she felt internally could not spill into the open today. Soldiers watched their leaders' smallest movements. And in times of uncertainty, their eyes amplified everything. When she stepped outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp grass and diesel from early transport convoys. She walked toward the headquarters building, where she had been instructed to report for a formal briefing. But something unexpected happened as she crossed the central quad. Every soldier she passed straightened their posture. Every NCO nodded with deliberate respect. Every young private looked at her not with fear, but with something stronger, gratitude. Some offered a quiet ma'am. Others simply met her eyes and held the gaze for a beat longer than usual. Emily wasn't used to being looked at like this. She was a good officer. She knew that. She trained hard, worked harder, and held her soldiers to a high standard. But she had never been the subject of admiration. Not like this. When she reached the steps of headquarters, a familiar voice called out, "Captain Hart." She turned to see Private Hannah Pierce, the young recruit Avery had singled out the previous day. Hannah hurried toward her, breath visible in the cool morning air. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you." Her voice wavered with raw emotion. "For standing up for us. For standing up for yourself. When he said those things yesterday, I felt powerless." Emily softened. "You're never powerless, Pierce. Not while you have a chain of command that protects you." Hannah swallowed. "But not everyone would have done what you did." Emily paused, choosing her words carefully. "What I did was necessary, for my safety and for all of yours. But don't ever believe that courage only looks like taking someone down." She placed a steady hand on the young private's shoulder. "Sometimes courage is just refusing to look away." Hannah nodded, tears threatening to spill, and Emily continued inside. The briefing room was sterile and cold, its fluorescent lights humming overhead. A long table stretched across the center, lined with binders and recording equipment. 3 officers sat waiting, a legal advisor, a senior investigator, and Major General Hale. "Captain Hart," Hale greeted with a nod. "Please take a seat. This is the beginning of the formal inquiry process." Emily sat, her back straight, her hands folded neatly. The legal advisor, Major Colin Reeves, opened a folder. "You should be aware," he began, "that Colonel Avery has officially filed charges accusing you of assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm." Emily inhaled through her nose, expression unchanged. Reeves continued, "He is alleging that you attacked him without provocation, and that your actions were retaliatory in nature due to his performance criticisms during the inspection." Emily almost scoffed at the absurdity, but she kept her composure. General Hale leaned forward. "Captain, before we proceed with questioning, I need to know if you require representation. You have the right to counsel." "No, ma'am," Emily replied. "I understand the process, and I'm ready." Reeves exchanged a subtle look with the investigator, but neither argued. Instead, the questioning began. They asked about the inspection, about the weapons bay, about Avery's tone, his comments, his proximity, his hand, about Emily's reaction. The questions were clinical, deliberate, designed to draw out inconsistencies. But Emily answered each one with clarity, never raising her voice, never hesitating. Halfway through the session, the investigator paused. "Captain Hart, did Colonel Avery physically touch you at any point before you defended yourself?" Emily met his gaze. "No, but he intended to." "Can you prove that intention?" "No, sir," she said calmly. "But everyone in that room knows what was about to happen." The investigator shifted. He believed her. She could see it in the subtle easing of his jaw, but belief alone was not enough for an official report. General Hale stepped in. "I've reviewed the statements from 22 witnesses so far. All describe Avery's behavior during the inspection as inappropriate, unprofessional, and escalating." Reeves closed his folder. "This inquiry will continue over the next several days," he said. "But I need to warn you, Captain, Avery has powerful allies in the upper chain. This may become more political than procedural." Emily nodded once. "I understand." Hale stood, signaling the end of the session. "Captain," she said gently, "you may find yourself under intense scrutiny. Reporters may reach out. Officers you thought were allies may distance themselves." Emily rose as well. "Ma'am, I'm not afraid of scrutiny." A faint smile touched Hale's lips. "I didn't think you were." Outside, the day had grown warmer, the sun casting sharp rays across the pavement. Emily stepped down the headquarters steps only to find a crowd of soldiers gathered near the gate. Not large, but noticeable. They didn't cheer. They didn't chant. They simply stood there, silent, steadfast, watching her with a quiet solidarity that hit deeper than applause ever could. In that moment, Emily felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Before she could speak, Sergeant Diaz appeared beside her, arms crossed. "Ma'am," he said, "we've got your back. All of us." Emily looked at him, then at the others, faces she had trained, disciplined, supported, and believed in. They weren't following her out of obligation. They were following her out of trust. And that made her stand even straighter. But while support grew outside, danger grew elsewhere. In a closed office on the opposite side of the base, 3 senior officers gathered with tense expressions. Papers spread across a mahogany desk, photos of the inspection, statements, medical reports. "Emily Hart is a problem," one said quietly. "She assaulted a colonel," another countered. "You saw the reports," the first officer pressed. "You know Avery's reputation. He crossed a line." "That may be," the third officer said slowly. "But Avery has friends. If we side with Hart, we expose ourselves." Silence. Politics over justice. Influence over truth. And in the middle of it, Emily Hart, whether she knew it or not, was becoming the symbol of something far larger than one broken arm and one corrupt officer. By the time Emily reached her quarters again, the weight of the day had settled on her shoulders. She sat at her desk, staring at the wall for a long moment before whispering, "This is only the beginning." And she was right. The true battle hadn't even started yet. The following morning cracked open with a tension so thick it seemed to cling to the walls of Fort Ridgeway. Rumors had spread far beyond the base, whispers slipping into nearby towns, military forums, and even a few curious journalists who had caught wind of an incident involving a colonel. Nothing concrete yet, just smoke. But Emily knew flames would follow. She stepped out of her quarters right at 0600. Her uniform was crisp, movements precise. She walked with the posture of someone refusing to bend, even if she felt fractures forming beneath the surface. As she crossed the yard, she noticed a sudden movement in the corner of her eye. A small group of soldiers, no more than a dozen, stood silently. When she walked past, they raised their hands in quiet salute. Not formal, not required. Voluntary. Emily acknowledged them with a firm nod, though her chest tightened at the gesture. It was too easy to forget, in the storm of investigations and accusations, that solidarity still existed, and she had earned it. But solidarity couldn't stop what came next. At 0700, she was summoned again. This time, not by General Hale, but by Brigadier General Marcus Stenton, deputy commander of the entire installation, and one of Avery's closest allies. His office was immaculate. Polished mahogany desk. Neat rows of framed medals. A portrait of him shaking hands with a former president. Everything about the room was meant to project authority. But what truly set Emily on edge was the expression he wore when she entered. The practiced smile of a man who knew exactly how power worked and how to wield it. "Captain Hart," he said smoothly, rising to shake her hand. "Please have a seat." She remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." He paused, smile tightening. "Very well." He moved behind his desk, folding his hands. "I'm sure you know why I called you here." "Yes, sir." He released a slow breath, the kind people use to signal disappointment before even hearing the full truth. "I've reviewed preliminary statements. I've spoken to Colonel Avery's medical team. His injury is severe. He'll require surgery, months of recovery. His career may be over." Emily held her ground. His career ended the moment he raised his hand to strike a subordinate. Stenton's eyes hardened for the briefest second. "Captain, I understand your perspective. But you created an enormous problem. A superior officer claims you assaulted him. Regardless of the context, the optics don't override the truth, sir." "Perhaps not," Stenton replied, voice clipped. "But they do influence careers." He stood abruptly and walked around the desk. Emily didn't move. He was taller, broader, built like a man who'd spent a lifetime expecting compliance. "Let me be candid, Captain. There are 2 paths forward." He raised 2 fingers. "1, this escalates. Court-martial. Media involvement. Reputational damage. Even if you win, your career will never fully recover." Emily's jaw tightened. And the second path? He lowered one finger. You submit a written statement revising your account, clarifying that the injury was accidental, that you misinterpreted Avery's body language. If you do this, we can resolve the matter quietly. No trial. No scandal. You remain in service with minimal disciplinary action. Emily stared at him. Sir, you're asking me to lie. I'm asking you to be pragmatic, Stenton corrected. For everyone's sake. Including yours. A long silence stretched between them, the kind that reveals far more than words ever could. Finally, Emily spoke, voice low but unshakable. I won't rewrite the truth to protect a man who abused his position. And I won't protect the system that allowed him to do it for years. Stenton's expression shifted into something cold. Be very careful, Captain. Loyalty to the institution is what keeps this army functioning. No, sir, Emily said quietly. Integrity is. His eyes narrowed. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Emily saluted sharply, turned on her heel, and walked out. Her hands began shaking only when she reached the hallway. Outside Stenton's office, General Hale waited, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. You knew he'd call me, Emily said. Yes. And you knew what he'd say. Hale nodded once. That man cares about one thing, control. Not justice. Not truth. Emily looked down the hall. So now what? Now, Hale said, lowering her voice, you prepare. Because he's going to come after you harder than Avery ever could. And the people backing Avery? They'll see you as a threat. Emily inhaled, slow, steady, grounding herself. I won't back down. I know, Hale replied. That's why they're afraid. She handed Emily a sealed envelope. Your official summons. The formal investigative hearing is scheduled in 48 hours. And Captain, it will be recorded, reviewed by JAG, possibly by the Pentagon. Emily held the envelope. This is bigger than me, isn't it? Hale's silence confirmed it. That afternoon, Emily walked across the training grounds, needing air, needing space to think. She found her steps drifting toward the far edge of the base, where the firing range stretched into the desert. She wasn't alone. Sergeant Diaz stood at the line, ear protection hanging around his neck, the smell of gunpowder still lingering. He noticed her and paused. Ma'am, didn't expect to see you out here. I needed a minute, Emily confessed. He nodded knowingly and handed her a pair of ear guards. No words needed. Just shoot. Emily accepted them, stepped into position, raised a pistol, and fired. Each bullet slammed into the paper silhouette with a fierce clarity she wished she could summon in every other part of this process. After several rounds, Diaz stepped closer. They're building a case, aren't they? Yes. He exhaled. Ma'am, people are scared. Not of you, of what it means if you lose. Because if someone like you can be crushed for doing the right thing, what chance does anyone else have? Emily looked at him, the weight of his words settling hard. I won't let them rewrite what happened, she said. I know. He nodded. That's why we're standing with you. But be ready. They'll try everything. Emily lowered the gun, staring at the distant mountains. I already feel the walls closing in. Diaz shook his head, then pushed them back, ma'am. Because this time, everyone's watching. As dusk settled, Emily returned to her quarters, noticing a sealed note slipped under her door. She bent to pick it up. No signature. No sender. Just one line. You're not as untouchable as you think, Captain. Her hand tightened on the paper. A warning. A threat. A reminder. The fight had officially begun, and Emily Hart wasn't backing down. Night settled over Fort Ridgeway in a heavy, muffled quiet, broken only by the distant rumble of transport trucks and the soft hum of lights flickering along the perimeter fence. Inside her quarters, Captain Emily Hart sat at her desk, the threatening note lying open beside her. She read it again, not because she doubted what it said, but because she needed to understand the intent behind it. You're not as untouchable as you think, Captain. The handwriting was sharp, rushed. Someone angry or frightened, or both. Someone who wanted anonymity. Someone who believed intimidation would make her fold. Emily leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. It didn't work. If anything, it steeled her resolve. Still, she placed the note in a plastic evidence sleeve, an old habit from her years training under officers who emphasized documenting everything. She would give it to General Hale in the morning. For now, she needed rest. But sleep didn't come. Images flickered through her mind. the raised hand, the shove of adrenaline, the twist of her body, the crack of Avery's arm breaking, his hiss of rage, his threats, the soldiers who'd watched everything, the silence that followed, and now, the bitter aftershocks, inquiries, politics, whispered alliances, threats sliding quietly beneath her door. A system fighting hard to protect one of its own. But she wasn't alone. That mattered more than anything. The day of the formal hearing arrived with the kind of cold, brittle air that made everything feel sharper, more dangerous. Emily woke before sunrise, her body running on discipline rather than rest. She dressed in her service uniform, the one meant for official testimonies, and stepped outside. Frost glittered across the ground. Her breath clouded faintly as she walked. Near the main road, she noticed figures gathering. At first, only 2, then 6, then nearly 30 soldiers, standing silently, lined up along the walkway. As she approached, Sergeant Diaz stepped forward, his voice steady. "Ma'am, Charlie Company wanted to be here for you, even if we can't go inside the hearing." Emily felt something twist deep in her chest. She didn't trust her voice, so she simply nodded. But they understood. The message passed between them with more weight than words could carry. She continued walking, each step heavier, yet steadier. The hearing room was stark, lit by harsh white panels. A long table sat centered between flags and recording equipment. 3 judge advocates presided at the head, while Major Reeves and General Hale occupied seats to the left. On the right side sat Colonel Avery's legal counsel, an older attorney with a stiff posture and a predatory stare. Avery himself wasn't present. He was still hospitalized after surgery, but his influence hung over the room like smoke. Emily took her seat. A recorder clicked on. Captain Emily Hart, one of the judge advocates, began. "This is the formal inquiry into the incident involving Colonel Douglas Avery on the morning of—" "I'd like to begin with an objection," Avery's attorney interrupted. "My client is unable to attend, and we believe this hearing should be postponed." General Hale didn't hesitate. "The captain should not be penalized for Colonel Avery's inability to appear. His written testimony has already been submitted." The judge advocate nodded. "Objection noted and overruled. Captain Hart, you may proceed." Emily inhaled, grounding herself. And then she began. She recounted everything, quietly, clearly, factually. No embellishment. No dramatics. Just truth. She described Avery's remarks. Her attempts to maintain professionalism. His escalation. His threats. His raised hand. The moment, everything changed. When she finished, Avery's attorney leaned forward. "Captain Hart, you claim self-defense. Yet you are a trained combat instructor with advanced certification. Isn't it true that your reaction would be significantly more forceful than an average soldier's?" "Yes," Emily replied. "Because I am trained to neutralize threats precisely and efficiently." "So you're admitting you used excessive force?" "No, sir. I'm admitting that I acted according to my training when a superior officer attempted to strike me." The attorney's lips tightened. "And you expect this panel to believe that a decorated colonel, your superior, would assault you without provocation?" Emily held his gaze. "I don't expect them to believe it. I expect them to review the witness statements of 22 soldiers who saw his behavior leading up to the incident. And I expect them to consider the fact that Colonel Avery has had 4 previous informal complaints against him sealed by officers in this very building." A ripple spread across the room. The attorney stiffened. "That information is classified." "It was," General Hale interjected sharply, sliding a file across the table. "But the Pentagon has authorized its release for this inquiry." Emily's heart skipped. Hale hadn't mentioned that to her. This was new. This was big. The attorney sputtered. "You're trying to destroy my client's career. Your client destroyed his own career the moment he tried to strike a subordinate," Hale said coldly. Silence hit the room like a dropped weight. The judge advocate cleared his throat. "We will review these documents during deliberation." A recess was called. As Emily stood, her legs trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of everything crashing together at once. General Hale approached her quietly. "You did well," she said. "And those complaints, they weren't easy to get released. But the truth needed air." "Ma'am," Emily hesitated. "What happens now?" "Now we wait." But Emily could read the tone beneath Hale's calm. The tide had shifted. For the first time, the system wasn't just resisting her. It was cracking open. Hours passed before the panel reconvened. The room stood silent as the judge advocate read the preliminary conclusion. Based on testimony, witness statements, and the newly released misconduct records of Colonel Avery, this panel finds Captain Emily Hart's actions to be justified as self-defense. A breath Emily didn't realize she'd been holding escaped her. But, the judge continued, given the political ramifications and pending administrative review, Captain Hart is temporarily relieved of command until the final decision is issued. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't victory. But it was truth. And truth had finally been recognized. Emily bowed her head once. Understood, sir. The hearing adjourned. When she exited the building, she expected emptiness. Instead, she found nearly 100 soldiers waiting, men and women from her company and others, standing in absolute silence. When they saw her, they didn't cheer. That would have broken protocol. Instead, in one unified motion, every single one of them lifted their hands in salute. Emily froze. Emotion surged, raw, overwhelming, impossible to hide. Then Sergeant Diaz stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, "you stood for us. Today, we stand for you." Emily blinked hard, her breath catching. She didn't command them anymore, not officially. But leadership had never been about rank. It was about courage. And in that moment, Emily Hart finally understood something profound. Sometimes the battle isn't won on the field. Sometimes it's won in the places where truth is fragile and courage is costly. Places like this one. She stepped forward and returned their salute. Her voice carried across the courtyard. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's the beginning." And she meant it. Whatever came next, reviews, appeals, politics, she would face it. Not alone, but with an army of truth behind her.